Thank you so much for tuning in to yet another presentation of Let's Talk Pot. This is actually the fourth in our installment of this series where we discuss things having to do with marijuana. Today, specifically, we are going to talk about driving. How marijuana can, if somebody is using marijuana, how that can affect their ability to drive safely, especially what's happening in the brain. And then let's say you're somebody that is about to get in a car with somebody and you think maybe they've had too much to drink or they have been using some sort of drug like marijuana. What do you do about that? How do you handle that situation? It can be kind of sticky. So we're going to talk about those things today. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Shari Egeland. I am the Associate Director at Omni Youth Programs. Omni Youth Programs is an independent nonprofit in Sacramento, California, and we are a prevention agency, which means our mission is to do everything we can to help teens, families, community members, who's ever interested in preventing youth use of marijuana and alcohol specifically. But we don't just talk about those things because I'm sure you can imagine there's a lot that goes into that. There's some mental health stuff and just some life skills and information that helps people achieve what goals that they may have in life. So if anything you ever hear me talk about in any of these Facebook Lives or any of the subjects I kind of mentioned before, I and my partners at Omni Youth Program, we do free presentations all over Sacramento County. You can call us anytime. You can email me is the best way because of Corona. We haven't been in the office really at all. But you can email me. I put my email in the description. It's Shari, Shari, at omniyouth.net. If you're interested in a presentation for your group, maybe you attend, maybe you have a class that you're going to online, we can do things via Zoom. If we're able and it follows the correct guidelines, we can do in-person presentations. Right now, it seems like most of the stuff we're doing is via Zoom and online. So we're totally ready to do that. But we do those for free anywhere around Sacramento. So again, if you belong to a parent group or a youth group or an organization or even just your work, and you want to do like the lunch and learn when it's lunchtime, and we can cater a presentation to whatever your needs are to however long you want. But now that I've gotten all that over with, let's get down to what we are here to talk about today specifically. Let's talk part 4. Don't drive the highway. We're talking about why. Why not drive when you're high? And it may seem like, why is she talking about? Doesn't everybody know you shouldn't drive when you're high? Well, that would be great, but unfortunately, that's not the case, especially lately. It's interesting that drunk driving with alcohol, people seem to be pretty aware of that. It's still definitely a problem and something that you should be vigilant about, making sure your friends aren't driving when they're drinking and that you're not getting into a car after you've been drinking. But what's interesting is that the last few years, the instances of people driving while under the influences of alcohol are going down. Again, still a problem, but they are going down. While the instances of people who test positive for THC and are involved in auto accidents, those rates are actually going up. So they've done a lot of studies trying to figure out what's going on here. And they actually found, there's been several studies, way too many to make it seem like, oh, that's kind of weird. That probably isn't true. There's been quite a few studies lately that have shown that 50% of marijuana users have admitted to driving while they were high, meaning that they use marijuana, they still kind of feel the effects of it, and they drive. There's also another study, which shouldn't surprise you, that shows that they studied both marijuana users, people that use semi-regularly and kind of frequently, and then they studied people that don't use. And they asked those two groups of people, do you think it's safe to drive while using marijuana? Well, for those people that admitted to using marijuana, 50% of them said, yes, I think it's safe. And not just that, those are young people. Those are people under 24 and under that said that. 50% of those who are 24 and under said that if it's somebody that uses marijuana, 50% of them said that they think it's safe to drive while using marijuana. When they asked people who don't use marijuana if it's safe, it was under 15%. It was like 14% of those people said it was safe. So that's lower, which is good. So I'm hoping that some of the things that we talk about today, if you've been wondering if it's safe or if you should drive when you're high, what's going on there, hopefully I can answer some of those questions for you today. And if you're about to get in a car with somebody and you're worried that they might have been using or that they might be high on marijuana, maybe a couple of these little informational bits is something you can pass on to them to encourage them not to do that. Wouldn't that be great? Um, it's interesting that actually, kind of sad, but it is interesting to know that actually, right now in the US, for every 1 out of 4 drivers who are killed in an auto accident, they have THC in their system. Now, the amount of THC, it's not like blood alcohol level. That makes it kind of difficult because blood alcohol level, we know how alcohol interacts with your body's what's going on inside, basically. And we have limited the amount of alcohol that's legal. No matter if you get the hardest alcohol there is, it can only be a certain percentage. But that's not true with marijuana. There's many different strains. There's lots of different potencies. The part that gets you high, the THC in marijuana, right now, most dry strains, the kind that you smoke like in what you think of a typical joint, that's anywhere from like 14 to 30% THC. For the vaping, the THC can be as high as like 99%, so really much, much, much higher. So the reason that that's important is because that's why it's hard to tell, it's hard to measure THC and it's hard to say what a safe amount is because there's so many different strains and there's so many different potency and things like that. And marijuana reacts very differently in our bodies than alcohol does. It makes it more difficult to measure, more difficult to know. Some people have smoked marijuana and still have THC in their system up to 12 or 14 hours later. I've even seen some studies that show even 24 hours later, there's THC in their system. I spoke, little Freudian slip there. I spoke with a parent who had a young person that was under the age of 18 that went to treatment for marijuana addiction. And she shared that it took 50 days, 50 days, for the levels of THC to go down in her son's system. So again, this is a tricky substance that's out there. So it's important that we know about it. So again, 1 in 4 drivers who are killed in auto accidents have THC in their system. And you might be thinking, well, maybe they're not the ones that caused the crash. Just because they have THC in their system doesn't mean that they caused it. Well, they also found in that same study that those involved in vehicle crashes, when they had THC in their blood, particularly higher levels, they were 3 to 7 times more likely to be the ones responsible for that accident. And again, 3 to 7 times seems like a big kind of difference there, but we're really talking about depending on the potency, what kind of marijuana they smoked, if they were doing concentrates or all of those things. But they're showing that if you have THC in your system, you're 1 out of 4 times, that's the people that die in accidents have that in their system. There's actually 2 studies in Europe that they did. They did these really large studies. Europe is really looking at this a little more closely than US. The US is starting, but the US has Europe has some pretty good studies out there. They found that drivers with THC in their body were 4 times as likely to be responsible for a fatal crash. They're looking at it a lot differently than we are a little bit, but these numbers, basically, I'm just letting you know, it is something that you should be concerned about. Have you ever noticed that when you're around somebody who's using marijuana, or if you yourself have used marijuana, that you tend to think that things are funnier than they actually are? They tend to laugh a lot, giggle, things like that. That's kind of one of the popular things. When you picture somebody high on marijuana, you picture them giggling and laughing a lot. Well, what's going on there is that's how the marijuana affects your brain. It actually affects your judgment. That's one of the first things that marijuana does. As soon as you smoke it, it hits that judgment center in your brain. That's why sometimes you'll laugh at something where normally most people that aren't high, or that when you're not high, you don't think it's funny at all. But because you're high on marijuana, it seems funny. Again, that's your judgment. Have you also noticed that sometimes when you're around somebody that's high, or if you've ever been high, that your balance is affected? Sometimes they kind of might sway, or if they get up and try to walk, they kind of go, whoa, wait a minute, and they have to sit back down. That's both their motor coordination, being able to balance themselves, and their sense of balance. Those are all skills that are super important when you're driving. I'm sure you can imagine. When you're driving, anything can happen. That's something we have to remember. You could just have a smooth drive home with nobody, no animals running out in front of you, no flat tires, nobody hitting their brakes all of a sudden. But you don't know when those instances happen. You don't know. I actually was driving down the freeway not that long ago, going about 68 miles an hour on I-5, and my tire blew. I had no idea that was going to happen. I didn't hit anything. I had no warning. So if I had a drug in my brain at that time that messes up my judgment and my motor skills, and not only that, but my reaction time, that's another big thing that happens when you use marijuana, your reaction time. If I had that in my brain, I wouldn't have been able to slow the vehicle down, and just because you have to react within sometimes less than a second, sometimes in the car. So that's again why it's really important, because I've heard some young people say, well, I think it's better if I drive when high because marijuana helps me focus. Well, all I can say to that is it might seem like that's true because for some people it kind of chills them out. But let me assure you, it really is messing up. You're not as focused as you should be, and your reaction and your reflexes aren't going to be as good. You're going to miss a lot of times when you try to hit. Another thing that you might have noticed is a lot of times when people use marijuana, their eyes are really red. Red eyes is one of the main symptoms of marijuana use, especially when I was back in high school. That was the way a lot of people got busted at my school. The teacher could tell by the red bloodshot eyes. But why do your eyes get red? What's going on there? Marijuana actually causes the blood vessels in your eye to expand, and that kind of brings out those stereotypical bloodshot eyes. But remember, when your eyes are like that, it actually causes your vision to be much more blurry, and you can't see as well. And the part of your vision that's really affected is what's called your peripheral vision. So what's peripheral vision? A lot of people know, but in case you don't, if you're sitting in front of your computer, put your arms out to the side and still look straight ahead, like look into my eyes right now on the screen, but wiggle your fingers. See how even though you're looking at me, you can kind of see those fingers wiggling? Well, one thing that marijuana does is they found this through lots of studies, it actually decreases your peripheral vision to where, like, if you start to bring your arms forward, if you were somebody that was using marijuana, your arms would have to be almost in front of you before you could see those fingers wiggling. So if you're driving, especially if there's an animal or another car that's not paying attention and they cut out in front of you, those are all peripheral vision things. So you need your peripheral vision, you need your reaction time, you need your judgment. All of those things that you're going to need are not working well if you have marijuana in your system. In particular, just to get a little brain sciencey on you, the part of your brain that is especially bad for driving that marijuana messes with is something called your cerebellum and your basal ganglia. Those are the things that talk about coordination, balance, and again, that reaction time that's so important. Now, I know that we talked earlier about drunk driving, how that's on the low, which is good, but still something to be vigilant about. I do want to talk about mixing alcohol and marijuana, because then you got a double whammy, right? Everybody knows that alcohol isn't a good thing to have in your system at all, really in any amount when you're driving. But a lot of times when people are using marijuana, alcohol goes along with it. It's important to know if you're a regular user of marijuana, so you know kind of about how much you can smoke before you're, to the point where you're overly stoned or really high. Do you know that if you're drinking alcohol, your body prioritizes processing the alcohol first? So what happens is, what they're finding is people that combine both alcohol and marijuana at the same time, they actually report feeling more stoned on the same amount of marijuana that usually makes them feel not as stoned. It's because the alcohol, that's what the alcohol is doing. So it doesn't necessarily increase the amount of THC in your system, but it kind of does because your body's not burning it off as regularly as it would without the alcohol in your system. So you do want to be especially careful if those two things are happening. So I have a little scenario before I get into some tips on how to avoid getting into a car with somebody that's driving. Here's a little scenario for you. Imagine this. Somebody is driving. Maybe you can picture it like a video game or something. They're running red lights. They're driving really, really fast. They're crossing center lines in the opposite lanes, getting into accidents, hitting pedestrians. So what would you imagine the person driving is either one, trying to get away from doing something bad, but usually you would think, okay, that person's under the influence. If you're running red lights, driving too fast, crossing the center lines into oncoming traffic, getting in, hitting people, of course, that person's under the influence. Well, this is interesting because they actually did a study where they put people in driving simulators with those type of situations. A driving simulator is kind of like a video game, but it's more like a real life situation. Here's what they found. They found that those that used marijuana regularly before the age of 16, those were the ones that I was just describing. They were sober and not stoned, no marijuana in there, no THC. They actually did blood tests, no THC in their system at the time of the driving simulation. But those people that used marijuana before the age of 16, they actually had a more difficult time and were more likely to hit pedestrians, run red lights, things like that. And these are people, again, that are older now. They're up past 20, 24, 25, some of them were. And again, they don't have THC in their system at the time. So the researchers were pretty surprised about that. It's a pretty cool article. It's in the Journal of Alcohol and Drug Dependence. I really encourage you to check it out. But basically what they're saying, that heavy users, which means more than like 4 or 5 times a week, that started using before they were 16, their ability to drive safely was affected pretty much throughout the rest of their life. Why is that? Well, if you looked at some of our past Let's Talk Pot, and you can do that if you check out our YouTube channel or check out the videos on our Facebook page here, you'll know that our brains are still developing until we're 25, right? And all of the things that marijuana does to our brains, the younger you use marijuana, the more long-lasting effect it's going to have on your brain and your chances of becoming addicted. So that's something to think about. So that alone, again, if somebody who's not high hasn't used it all, but they used in the past, if that can affect your driving, imagine what actually being high at the time can do to affect your driving. That's pretty crazy, right? So if anybody has any experiences that they want to share, you know, of hopefully you're okay and nothing too tragic happened, but any stories that you know of somebody who thought it was safe to drive and they didn't, and they've learned their lesson, you know, sharing with others what you've learned, that would be great. I would love to hear those stories. If you want to send me an email, I can keep you anonymous and just kind of share them through our social media without saying who you are. But those are great stories because it can be kind of sticky. What do you do? What do you do if you suspect someone has been using marijuana or alcohol or another drug and they're the ones that's supposed to drive you home, or they're asking you to get in the car with them, or maybe you're not getting in the car with them, you just know that they're about to get in their car and drive home. And even though you're not getting in the car, you know that it's not a safe situation. What do you do? What do you say? Because, you know, again, judgment is the number one thing influenced a lot of times by marijuana and alcohol. So if somebody's drunk or high, their ability to judge if they're safe to drive is greatly diminished and sometimes completely gone. So what do? How do you handle that situation? You kind of want to, you don't want to start an argument. You definitely don't want to get yourself in any kind of physical danger whatsoever. Avoid that at all costs. But there are some little tricks that they found that you can do. The number one thing, if you're sober, offer to drive. Offer to drive them. You can drive them home and then maybe take an Uber back, find another sober driver to follow you. Those are all things that I remember doing back in the day when I was at college parties especially. I would usually be the one saying, well, I haven't been drinking, I'll drive you home. So there's actually people, I am now well over college age, I'm over 40. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I'm over 40. And I've actually just randomly bumped into people that I used to kind of hang out with in my 20s and my mid 20s. And it's funny, more than once, different people have said, you know what, Sherry, I think I might be alive today because of you. And they're kind of saying it half joking. And so I kind of laugh. I go, oh my gosh, really? And they say, no, seriously. All those times that you stopped me from doing something when I was drinking or when I was high, I don't know what would have happened to me if you wouldn't have stepped in. And that feels pretty good. I don't know for sure if that's true. I don't know if they may have, who knows what my actions, what effect they had. But I tell you, it does feel pretty good later in life to hear that from somebody. So always offer to drive. One thing is try to be calm. You don't want to get in a shouting argument. If they start shouting, you don't need to shout back. To shouting, people just, the volume gets turned up. So try to not yell, keep it down. You want to be upfront. You want to be as honest as possible and let them know maybe some of the things that you learned here today in this talk, what might be happening in their brain. How many times people that have been driving with THC in their system have ended up causing a fatal accident. That's something that you really don't want, obviously, right? Well, another really big thing to do is see if that friend can sleep over wherever they're at, especially if that's at a house or a party. Maybe you could drive them to your house and they can stay the night if you're sober, and then you could drive them back to get their car the next day. That's something else that I've done too. Because please know that the only thing that can sober somebody up that's been drinking or using marijuana or other drugs, the only thing is time. There's a lot of myths out there about drinking coffee or water, eating a greasy burger, or taking a shower. Those are a lot of the ones that were out when I was younger and still are out there. None of those are true. Absolutely not true. It might have felt like it was true in the past, but believe me, they've done some pretty severe studies on that. Because the doctors and insurance people out there, they don't want you driving high more than you do, really. And it's not always safety is their concern, but sometimes it is. But anyways, they would find anything they could to help somebody sober up before they're drunk. And so they've actually looked pretty hard at a lot of these, drinking coffee, drinking caffeine, eating, shower, things like that. Nothing sobers you up but time. You just need to wait. You need to stop using the substance and let your body process it out naturally. That's the only way to be okay. Now, one thing that I have done before, and that they have actually did studies that actually kind of worked, how they actually have proven this, but you need to be careful, is to take their keys. If somebody really seems like they're drinking a lot and you say, hey, do you have a destination? Is somebody driving you? Oh, no, I'm fine. I'll be okay. Trying to figure out a way to get their keys if that's safe. Because again, I don't want you to get into any kind of physical confrontation or anything that would hurt you in any way. But sometimes doing like taking their keys when they're not paying attention, which again, if they're drunk or high, is kind of easier than usual. And then if they're looking for their keys and, they just can't find them. Oh, shoot, we can't find your keys. Well, let me drive you home. That's a little white lie that I think the person will thank you for in the long run. And again, your friends, the people hopefully that you're around. Don't do that again if it's going to, endanger you or anybody else. But sometimes it's worth taking that risk because them getting in a car is actually really dangerous. The biggest thing I want to say is please don't give up. Do everything you can. Talk to them, distract them, try to get them to stay longer. Again, invite them to your house if you're the one that's sober. And this generation is really lucky to have those ride sharing apps like Uber and Lyft and things like that. Those are great and really cost effective, especially if you do the shared ride kind of thing. And I think that that's maybe one of the contributors to why drunk driving is going down now, because that is such an option for some people. So please don't give up. They actually did a study very interestingly, and they found out that where they had people try to intervene with both strangers and friends, and what's interesting is the results were the same, whether they tend to know the person or not. 75% to 80% of the time, they were effective in stopping that person from driving. Sometimes we're just afraid to say something, it's not really my business, or they're probably okay. Why risk it? just go up, offer some of these solutions that we've talked about. If you have any other solutions that you want to share in the chat box, please do that. I'm sure people would love to hear about those. But again, remember this study found 75 to 80% of the time, people were successful in getting the person not to drive. So just stay calm, talk to them about it, talk to them about, maybe a little distraction kind of comment might be good. Talk to them about what's going on, and offer some of these solutions that we've talked about. Well, that wraps up. Actually, that's all I have to share for this time at Let's Talk Pot. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, this is going to be available if you have seen this and thought, ooh, I think this person would really, I need to share this, or I need to show this person. It's going to be on our Facebook page for quite a while. We also, Omni Youth Programs has a free YouTube channel that has a lot of different videos. We have one on there that's pretty cool that's called What to Say When, which is, let's say somebody is offering you marijuana and telling you things like it's safe, it's natural, don't worry if it's not addictive. What can you say in response to that? There's a quick YouTube video that you can watch that gives you actual words to say to somebody when they're pressuring you to do that. This video, along with the other ones in the Let's Talk Pot series, are going to be on that YouTube channel, so please check that out. And again, if anything you've heard today, if you would like us to come do a presentation for you or your group, or even if you want to get 10 to 12 family members together on a Zoom and everybody listens to the topic, that's great too. We're happy to serve any audience that would like to request our services. So again, send me an email, shari@omniyouth.net, or you can check out our check out our website at omniyouth.net. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time.